see that I'm recording. Yes. Okay, so welcome everyone to today's guest talk. We are really delighted to have Thomas here from Magelan.tech. And yes, Kamal and I both found a presentation from Thomas and Adrien about Magellan, I think on My Climate Journey or Climate Action Tech. And
Yes,
we're just okay, Climate Action Tech. Yeah, we were just blown away by how exciting it seemed to have this tool developing to help more businesses and companies achieve carbon neutrality and do some carbon accounting across their company operations. So Magellan helps tech companies develop their activities through environmental strategies that are up to the daunting task of mitigating global warming. The team does every mission that contributes to carbon neutrality. They, of course, do carbon assessments, but also provide learning, skills, and tools for teams. With a pragmatic and hands-on approach, most of their work and resources are openly shared to help companies and businesses of all sizes and means address climate change. During this 1-hour discussion, they will show how tech companies like Microsoft, Stripe, Zalando are starting to implement ambitious climate strategies and how to do so within your own companies. So welcome, Thomas, and I will turn it over to you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Lani. I'm really happy. Adrien is not here, but I'm really happy to talk and to do this talk this afternoon or this morning. I don't know where you are. I'm in Paris, by the way. So with Adrien, my co-founder, we started Magellan, and we are trying to help companies address climate change and design climate strategy. And we started to work on this presentation. The presentation I will explain you, show you. A few months ago, when many tech companies started releasing the climate strategies, like we heard about Microsoft, Stripe, Google, and so we wanted to know what was behind, and we wanted to explain and to give people like tools to reproduce this strategy. So during my talk, I will be really short for the first part, which is a short recap on the problem that you already know, I think, like climate change. And the second part, I will be a bit longer, like we'll discuss it in 40 minutes. I will try to explain with a 6-step to-do list how to implement a climate strategy within your organization, or how to help any organization doing so. So if you have any question, you can directly type them on Zoom and interrupt me, so we will do it more like a conversation. And I will be really happy to answer all your questions at the end. So climate strategy for tech companies and startups. So yes, I just skipped the first slide, but here are Adrien and I. We have been working on climate change since 2 years. Yeah, we started 2 years ago, and it was quite a shock for us when we first went through the IPCC report and everything. But I think you already know all of that. 55 degrees in the shade, so new record of temperature in the Death Valley this summer. At the beginning, it was a joke, but now it's a new record. So 10 minutes just to recap, just to give you a short recap of the problem. You know, one day we discovered fossil fuels, so it all started with fossil fuels. 80% of our energy mix, coal, oil, gas. It made England and the US the richest country on earth at some times. Extremely convenient. They have allowed us to do all kinds of things. The flip side, you know it, they produce gases. These gases go into the atmosphere, they pile up. So every year we add a short slice, kind of a blanket. I like to explain it with this image. Imagine the earth, and we add a blanket. We cover the earth with a new blanket every year. So even this year with the lockdown, we will add CO2. I have my pointing. We will add the CO2, and as you know it already, the more CO2 we add, the warmer we get. So already 1.1 degree Celsius on average. And what's interesting here is that we knew the first calculation and the first correlation between CO2 and temperature was drawn at the beginning of the century. So we knew that by adding CO2 into the atmosphere, by doubling the concentration of CO2 of the atmosphere, we will add 3 or 4 degrees. It has been like 100 years. We know that since almost a century, and the first measurement of CO2 were made in 1950 in Hawaii. And basically, you have like all these videos and papers made by Shell and ExxonMobil dating from 1980s, showing that many people knew where we were heading. And the warmer we get, the more trouble we are in. I don't explain that. You already know most of it, but you have like many sources if you want to. Anyway, just remember when really bad weather will happen. With 2 degrees of temperature rise, it's almost game over. This is because of tipping point and feedback loop. Yes, this one is like it during the last ice age. It was only 5 degrees less, and we could go to the US from the UK because there was like a huge, there was, the ocean was covered by ice. So 5 degrees is a lot, yes. The good news, we can still stay below 2 degrees. The bad news, we will have to reduce our emission by 40% in 10 years, which is quite a lot. This is for 40%, I think, for total emission, and it's a bit more for developed countries. So that's what we have been emitting until now, between 40 to 50 billion tons of CO2. That's the path we need to follow, which is an important reduction because, as you already know, most of our daily activities emit greenhouse gases. So next time, please only buy 40% of a new pair of jeans, and so maybe one leg only. It will be easy to avoid doing a few things like taking airplanes for leisure or for going for holidays, but something will be harder to quit. Some habits will be harder to quit. So we need to change a lot and quickly. Individual, government, companies, and some companies want to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So now I will be explaining climate strategy of tech companies. So there were a lot of announcements made regarding climate strategies. A climate strategy is not a conventional CSR strategy. It's like concrete action to reduce greenhouse gases. And the first announcement was the one of Microsoft at the beginning of the year. All these announcements are quite recent. They do not date back like more than 1 year or 2 years. So this was the first. They're saying they want to be carbon negative within 10 years and to remove from the atmosphere all the historical carbon emissions within 30. So we'll try to explain what that means and if we can trust them to do, but yeah, we can. And some of them, many of them, made a similar announcement. Smaller one, these are 2 French companies. So these companies commit to track and reduce the emissions and want to contribute to the low carbon transition. Let's keep that. And we think that every company should address this issue, regardless of size and mean, particularly tech companies and startups. And this is the beginning of the crucial part. So we cooked up a 6-step to-do list just for you to reproduce this kind of strategy. So 6 steps to implement a climate strategy within any company. So you will have to understand your company's climate impact, drawing a path toward carbon neutrality, operating in a low carbon way. I will explain all of these points. So first point, understanding your company's impact on climate. So what's your company's impact on climate? It's the CO2 emission it produces, basically. And by CO2, in fact, you already know that there are many greenhouse gases, but we can compare them. So we talk about CO2 equivalent. So this is a basic unit, and you have like all these graphs that can help you to balance and compare between various greenhouse gases. So how to track this emission? You have to do estimates. So a company is basically a list of many operations. Like you have to rent an office, you have to heat up your office, you have to give computers and smartphones to your employees. They need to come to the office, to move to like to fly for business trips. You have a list of companies, and for each of this activity, you can translate these activities into units, like how much electricity do I need to heat up my office for a regular year? How much kilometers have my business people traveled this year? So you have like activities and units that you can translate into CO2 emissions. And on the internet, you will find all the key to translate activities between CO2 emissions. So then you get the amount of CO2 equivalent produced by a company, which is called carbon footprint. And it's the same for a country, for a state, for an individual. You have activities that emits, and the sum represents the carbon footprint. So you have people doing that, carbon accountant or online tools. Many startups are developing online tools to count, to measure CO2 emissions, to make it faster and cheaper. So you have to count every emission related to your company's business. So let's take the example of a marketplace. So I'm a marketplace, and I sell t-shirts on the internet. So for each t-shirt I will sell, I have many activities on my value chain. I have to grow cotton, to transform cotton into t-shirt, to store my t-shirts, and my users, like people buying my t-shirts, need to clean it. So who does what? Here you will see the difference between scope 1 and 2 and scope 3. So for a company, you are responsible for emission that are related to your own operation. So if you are a marketplace, you only like store t-shirts and sell them. But on your value chain, you have more people implied, more people working. So you have this scope 1 and 2, which are your own operation, and scope 3, your induced emissions. So this is an important distinction. And when you give a look at carbon assessments of companies, you always have scope 1 and 2 and scope 3. So this is important for the next part. So now we know how much our company emits. So we have understood our company's impact on climate. Now we need to draw a path toward carbon neutrality. So knowing where we are, we can decide where we want to go. We just need to ask planet first. So this is important. Carbon neutrality only matters on a global scale. We can only talk about planetary carbon neutrality. So you already know that Earth has the ability to absorb a part of the CO2 we emit, thanks to oceans like plants, trees. So it can absorb some of the CO2 we are emitting, but if we emit more, the remaining CO2 goes into the atmosphere, and we know the consequences. So when human activities only emit what Earth can absorb, we call it carbon neutrality. So for a company, if a company wants to do its part, it has to reduce its emission deeply enough to be compatible with planetary carbon neutrality. So it's not, okay, I'm neutral, it's I'm in line with planetary carbon neutrality. So how can we know how much we can emit as a company? You have tools, and the main one is science-based target, SBT. It's a tool to help you, a company design its reduction path. So let's see how it works. Here we have taken an example of a French delivery company. It's almost the same as a FedEx or UPS. So it's a delivery company with more than 2,000 employees. How much CO2 can I emit? They ask science-based target scientists to reply, and at the end they will give to the company that made the demand reduction trajectory. So and now we have like a good understanding of the situation. We know our carbon footprint, and we know how much we need to reduce to fall in line with planetary carbon neutrality, which is a state, the state we collectively have to reach. We have to reach collectively. So now we need to reduce. Most companies need to reduce the CO2 emissions, so they need to find ways to operate in low carbon way. So we are not without possibilities. There are many possibilities to reduce your CO2 emission. Like you can ask you can ask your employees to use bikes to come to work. You can promote home office, promote meatless diet. Like you have a few tricks, a few ways to do so. But as we said, and if you give a look to companies' carbon assessment, most of the time, all the emissions are located into the scope 3 category. So into the induced emission category. So if we go back to our marketplace, to reduce its own emission, it can use renewable energy for its storage and utility. You can have like a low carbon website, but all your the meaningful emission are not on its direct emission, but on other parts of the value chain. So to reach its target of reduction, it has to address induced emission. So to work with partners and suppliers to reduce the total emission. So maybe if you have this marketplace, you will have to find new partner to buy organic cotton, to make your t-shirt last longer, to change a bit your business model. So that's an important distinction between scope 1 and 2, scope 3. And when you look at carbon assessment, most of the time they do not speak about scope 3, which is the most important. So basically, this is what Zalando announced. So if you give a look to the press release where they made an announcement regarding the climate strategy, they say, okay, we will cut our business operation emission by 80%. So this is direct emission. This is quite easy. But then they will ask, they've set a target of having like 90% of partners selling clothes on this marketplace to adopt a science-based target approach, which is really huge because you forbid people to sell products on your marketplace if they don't comply, if they don't try to reduce the emission. So you have ways to address your emission for direct emission, but also induced emission. Okay, how do we proceed? Quite easy. You go through every emission sources and you brainstorm on ways to lower them. You pick and you select the easiest one to implement, the cheapest one to implement, and the one with more impact. You start with this one. You plan, you can put KPIs, and you have like owners of every action. So it's almost the same as like a product planning or product management planning. So now we have a situation at the beginning with our carbon footprint, and we have designed, we know our target, and we have reduced thanks to low carbon operation. But maybe sometimes it won't be enough. It won't be enough to reach your carbon neutrality target. So this is when, like, now we will have to talk about carbon credits, carbon offsetting. So you can buy emission carbon credit. You can buy the right to emit. This is called carbon offsetting, and this is sometimes mandatory for company to reach the carbon targets. So then the company can declare itself aligned with carbon neutrality, and to how do you buy carbon credits? You do so by funding like a negative emission project. So you have many ways to absorb CO2 or to fund a negative emission project. You can plant trees to store carbon. You can avoid deforestation, many ways. These projects are crucial to mitigate global warming. If you give a look to the IPCC, yes, if you give a look to IPCC report, special report 1.5, every trajectory, every 1.5 trajectory is based on using carbon removal techniques, and we will need to extract, to absorb a lot of CO2 out of the air, even if we manage to reduce by an important scale our emission. So starting after mid-century, we will need to be able to absorb a lot of CO2 emission. I can show you the different IPCC report trajectory. But remember, these projects are crucial to mitigate global warming, and now we don't know how to remove carbon from the air on an important scale. So when a company or a private individual funds negative emissions, it's called carbon offsetting, and we hear a lot about it these days because it's really easy. You just need to pay, and you just don't need to change your business model. So many companies use these techniques and do so, but there are two main flows. So it's based on carbon price, and this carbon price differs. It lacks regulation. For example, Microsoft carbon strategy is based on a carbon price of $20. So they will pay CO2 at $20 per ton to remove it. The Boston Consulting Group climate strategy is based on a price of $80 per ton of CO2. And the cheapest way to offset, it's around 10%, $0.01 per ton. And this is the average amount airlines paid to offset the emissions. So you have really different prices. And in Europe, it's on CO2 markets, CO2 emission markets, it's currently $25 per ton. So it's really different. And sometimes it goes wrong. yes, in California, there were a few parts where trees have been planted to offset emission that burned after the fires. I have a few graphs to show you, Adrien, if you want. So we can't rely only on carbon offsetting, but I think you already know that. What you can remember, if, between 80 or 90% of efforts need to be made on emission reduction and 10% on carbon offsetting. So it's not really that you offset. It's not really that you offset, because, for example, when you plant a tree, it will absorb emission during its entire life. So within like 10 or 20 years. And when you emit already. So you have, so it's not totally the same. Like you can't really say that you have been offsetting. You have been, in fact, contributing toward carbon neutrality, but you cannot balance your emission. It's not a subtraction or an addition. But these techniques are important. So Stripe makes a $1 million contribution to carbon capture project. Why? Because they want to fund and to subsidize these techniques, because they are not yet, they cannot absorb CO2 on an important scale yet. So we need to put money on this project. This is an important graph. So this is Microsoft carbon neutrality scheme. So we can see many things here. In red, you have like scope 1 and 2 direct emissions. So you can see that direct emission of Microsoft are less than 10% of the total emission. In blue, total emission, so emission of the partners. For example, the factory manufacturing the tablet or phones or computer emits, and the emission are here in blue. It's not the Microsoft direct emission. The path towards carbon neutrality in 2030 is not that they won't emit, they will reduce the emission by 2, like they will divide it by 2, but they will finance carbon removal techniques by the same amount at $20 per ton. Yes, a question: how does one attribute emission in the supply chain? So you have 3 ways to do carbon assessment. Like you have methodologies, you have an ISO norms, you have in UK it's a GHG protocol, and in France it's bilan carbone. So you have methodologies to do so, and it's almost the same as doing financial accounting. Like you have to go through every sources. They send you like a list of sources, and you have to look at how much you have been emitting for every sources. And for example, if I sell a computer like Microsoft, I need to track on my scope 3, so on my induced emission, I need to track the emission of all of my suppliers that have been implied, that have participated in the production of this computer, to have at the end a good representation, like an accurate figure. So you also have to track emission of your suppliers if your suppliers have been emitting for product you sell. Let me know if you want more explanation. It's the same for Google, for example. They need to track emission of data. For example, if they use data center that are like that they rent to another company. They need to take into account emission of this data center they use for the services, but they don't, that they just rent. If you are a startup and you rent a data center with Amazon Web Service, you have to take into account. So that's, it is realistic to think that at some point in the near future, more and more suppliers will be able to provide any info. Yeah, that's a good question. In carbon, like in all these press releases and reports, sometimes they give you the accuracy of the calculation of the findings. So they can say, okay, we have a 20% error margin or 40%. So when they don't have figures, like when they don't have accurate figure, they just do estimates based on the average emission of this the same kind of company. But now we've because this question was first, it was the same in the CSR field with companies that needed to track and assess many suppliers. So now you have system to track and aggregate all this information and to make it easier to calculate. But when you do a carbon assessment, you don't really need to have like a perfectly precise figure at the end. You just need estimates to know where to send your efforts and to know which fields are important, which problems are important to address. So basically, contributing is great. So offsetting, contributing is great, but it's no substitute for effective action. So effective reduction. So keep in mind, reducing by 90%, contributing or offsetting the rest. That's what we collectively need to do. So now you know your. Okay, so, you know your company's impact on climate. You've designed your path toward carbon neutrality. You are starting to operate in low carbon way. You are investing into negative emission project. What can you do now? You can communicate with transparency. So let's try to make something out of all that. Topics like ecology and fighting climate change works well. So basically, if you do a growth hacking test, you will see that you will have like more results with value proposition based on ecology. But so everyone wants to get it done. This is a picture we like. It's an airport in France. They want to offset the total emission of the airport with like a few trees. So everyone will say that they want to reach carbon neutrality, but most of the time it's completely bullshit, almost bullshit, or almost an improvement. So people are no fool. This is a guide that you can find on internet to help you see if it's total greenwashing or if it's fine. So what we advise is to communicate with transparency and humility. So Stripe, they release all the assets, all the materials regarding carbon removal projects. So for any company who want to do the same, to just like do it faster, because we are in such a climate urgency that we advise to release your content in open source to help your ecosystem. This is a company selling sport outdoor clothes. It's a French Patagonia, we could say. And they, on the website, they explain what is the IPCC report, what are the commitments, and what they what is okay and what they are still struggling to do. So we think that it's a difficult subject, and it's not easy to act perfectly in your company, but the important part is just to explain and to help people gain an understanding of it. So we advise, we think displaying carbon footprints of product services is a great thing to do, because it can educate customers and clients to these topics, which are still a bit difficult for people to understand. So this is a company selling sneakers, running shoes, and they put the carbon footprint of every product next to the price. So it's another unit, which is important, not because like what is important, it's not the 7.1 kilo of CO2 per sneaker, it's the fact that it will help customers gain understanding of carbon footprint and of all these subjects. And it's a way to, yes, to explain them all these issues. Logitech will do the same. So it will, on like gaming products, Unilever also will do it. Microsoft has released like videos on carbon math and carbon accounting. So it's also a way to create link, like to make a brand more appealing to customers. And eventually, we won't blame a company that doesn't achieve a specific level of reduction, but we will turn our back from the one doing nothing. So the more we will be used to these issues and to this subject of carbon neutrality, of reducing emission, the more we will look at companies to see if they act accordingly. Are there any companies investing to support short solution like solar wind? Yes, climate bonds. Yes, that's totally something you can do. If you want to offset, you can like you can also buy like climate bonds to make the price of CO2 emission more expensive. So to and to, in fact, it's a way to use market. To use the market to reduce the total emission released, and you also, most companies they do not invest in like solar wind techniques. They just switch to renewables. Like Google, they have already switched to almost entirely to renewables. So they do not invest in, but they sign direct contracts. And Facebook and Google are the two biggest companies in terms of renewable electricity booked. And what you can do last, so last step, or 6 steps to do list. So launching new business activities. Atlas Green Transition, it's not only about reducing emission, it's also inventing products and services for tomorrow's world. So inventing products and services that can help us reducing our personal carbon footprint. For example, so this is a simple matrix. What I do, climate issues. So Shopify knows how to do payment interfaces for e-commerce. They know how to do e-commerce websites, and they know that we need to fund offsetting projects. So now they have released a feature allowing clients to directly offset emission from the delivery of the product they just bought. So it's a way to finance, to subsidize carbon offsetting projects. SAP, they know how to develop accounting softwares, and they just released a new software to help companies address climate change, like to help companies to do the carbon assessment. So to sum it up, you have to understand your company's impact on climate and to reduce your emission. So operate in low carbon way, most important task. Then to finish, to tackle entirely the problem, you have to draw a path toward carbon neutrality and maybe to invest into negative emission project, but only at the end. And to finish, like to be rewarded, you can communicate, but try to do so with transparency and explaining these issues to your customers. And you can launch new business activities that help people reduce their own carbon footprint. So are you in a small framework, what you can stop within your companies? You can directly stop to, you can stop high emission activities that are easy to avoid. Okay, we can decide not to take like airplane flight and just do like a remote calls. And what you need to stop, it's to hide away, but I think you don't hide away from the issue since you are here. What you can continue to deepen your understanding, it's so important to understand the problem in depth. And what you can start doing your part, gathering employees that want to act, brainstorming on ways to reduce your emission, doing your first carbon footprint assessment. It's not that expensive. So you have many ways to start working on it. So thanks. Now I can answer every question you have, Guy.
Thanks so much, Thomas. That was really informative and beautifully presented. It's really nice to see those clear steps laid out. And folks, go ahead and post your questions in the chat, or if you're just want to speak it out loud, just put your name or a +1 and I'll call on you. But it looks like Samyak has some questions that we can maybe start with.
Yes, I can show you. I will show you. Your question is a good one. How is that possible as renewables are not always on?
Yeah, basically, I got skeptical, when I hear claims from, say, Apple, Google, or Facebook that we are now powered by 100% renewable. So I just Google quickly. Yes, Apple has, they have installed more than 600 megawatt of solar, but does that mean they are not connected with the conventional grid?
I will. I had the same question. Do you see my screen? I want to show you something. This is the Google report where they explain how they do so and how they want to move toward carbon-free data center. Because that's right. For example, where you are, when you have a data center that use renewables like solar energy, but during the night, like they need fossil fuels energy. So in this report, they explain you how they want to match green electricity from the grid, from the local grid to the usage. So, for example, this is a data viz of carbon intensity of electricity used to power a data center. I don't know. I will. Yes, this one is in Finland, and for example, this one in North Carolina. So you can see that at noon, it's more. They use more carbon-free energy because they have more like solar energy. And at night, it's more fossil fuel energy. And so they explain how they want to match everything. So it's a mix of technique, buying more renewables, investing in new renewable capacities, investing in storage, locating data center in countries where you have a low carbon energy. So you have various techniques, and currently they are not, all the data centers are not powered by carbon energy. This is a target for 2030, and they want to do it, but they are not sure they will be able to do. But this report is quite useful. For example, like you have this is the data center in Taiwan, where it's only like fossil fuels electricity. And they explain that in Taiwan, you can't directly sign agreement with power utilities to buy renewables. So you can just have like the regular electricity of the grid. And they explain that they want to do like lobbying to change this regulation in Taiwan and to invest in renewable capacities. We will count the points. We will see how they did to change that. But yeah, currently they are not totally like they do not rely only on carbon-free electricity. What they say is that they match the amount of electricity they use to an amount of renewables electricity they buy, but it's not directly power. I am sorry if I missed the earlier, but what is Magellan business model? So you provide consulting services to tech companies on the net zero strategy product. Yes, Nickel, that's totally what we are doing. We do like, so it's the same business model as like regular consulting services. We help companies understand the project. So we do a bit of like teaching and some teaching. And then we help them do carbon assessments. We help teams find ways to operate in low carbon way. And we can advise them on how to, when they develop new services or products, how to do it with climate in mind. So I imagine you are primarily working with companies who have already booked in. Yes, totally, Keisha. So all our customers already know about the issue. Like most of them are people that have children, and they are aware of climate urgency, so they want to do something. We have never worked with a company where people were not like already used to the issue, because it's not mandatory. In France, it's only mandatory to do carbon assessment for companies with more than 500 employees, but you don't pay fine at the end. So only 20% of companies that have more than 500 employees, so that should do carbon assessment, really do carbon assessment. So if it's not mandatory, most companies won't comply to carbon neutrality targets. So we are only working with people that already know the issue. What is the plan for expanding your client base to companies who are less forward thinking? I think as a consultancy, we want to dedicate time to do this kind of talk and presentation, but it's only on how do you say that? Only if they want, like, if they want us to present and to talk about climate, we will do it. But you can't force a company plus like climate change, it's a new problem for companies. They already have like many of them, and this one is not mandatory. It's like it's a moral obligation, plus it's an obligation for us, but it's not a legal obligation. So we need to change in the regulation. Also, as a follow-up, what in-house talent do you see working in these companies? What skill gaps do you see? This is a good question, because we are currently thinking about also starting boot camps for within companies. What I usually say is that I think if we want to address climate change, we will have to, it will be almost the same as a digital like transition, digital transformation. We all need to be like reskilled and to learn about it. Like maybe in 20 years, it will be something totally, a skill that like carbon assessment will be a skill that anyone will master. So I think that, yes, most people, they don't understand the issue, they don't understand climate change, and they don't understand what the company impact. So now they can't do anything to act on it. So there is still a huge work to do on helping people understand the issue. That's a basic skill, but you can't solve a problem that you don't understand.
Thomas, can we back up a little bit? I think Sada, well, I mean, feel free to keep answering that question, but I think Sada had a question earlier that he didn't write down that I'll just let him ask. Yeah, unless you're still answering.
Yeah, I think my question was pretty similar to what Keisha and Nikhil had, but maybe Thomas, if you can talk about how do you see this moving forward, say in next 10 years, how do you see your company or this field making a big impact, maybe like an optimistic scenario and a pragmatic, like, yeah, that would be helpful.
That's a huge question. I'm sure, no, sometimes when I want to reply to this question, I start with, okay, if we want to solve climate change, let's imagine we have like solved climate change in 10 years or 20 years. So we have been addressing this carbon issue and reducing emission a lot. So if we want to reduce emission, we need strong regulation. So we need voters, so we need citizens that are fully aware of it. Because voting for strong regulation, you can only vote for strong regulation if you know what you will gain. Like if you tell citizens, okay, you need to have smaller cars, now it's forbidden to take airplanes, please don't eat so much meat. Like they need to know what they will have in exchange. So we need citizens that are really and fully aware of the issue, and we need companies that fall in line with this carbon neutrality targets. So we need workers that are skilled, and on every field, like we need tech workers that are skilled on how to design low carbon website or low carbon tools. And we need financial people that invest in so we need skills in every field. So I really think that if we want to have any chance to solve this issue, we need to invest a lot of time into making people more aware of it and to develop the new skills of the transition. So that's what we try to do on like a modest, humble scale. But I know talking with other consulting organizations, consulting companies on the climate field, but most of them are growing a lot. They recruit consultants, so it's in France at least, it's a growing field. So, and there is an important demand. So for us, I think it will be okay, for sure. But I don't know, it really depends of every national situation and every national regulation. In France, these last years, we have improved, and our awareness has improved, for sure. But I'm not, yeah, we'll see. As a follow-up, what you know? Okay, Keisha, I think in France, yes, I think in France people are generally more aware of environmental issues, and it's not polarizing fringe. That's sure. I have a small, like in France, 50% of people say it's really important, really urgent to address climate change, and 40% say it's urgent. So most people want to address it, and it's not a partisan issue. Almost not a partisan issue. It's more an issue like on the left. It's more important on the left side of the politician scheme, but now most politics try to talk about it, at least. In your consulting projects, how do you convince the C-suite through a return-based lens? What are your strategies to present carbon neutrality as economically viable? This is a good one. What we try to do, it's to show that it's almost sure that there will be a carbon price in the next years, and that the more you emit, the more exposed you are to a change of regulation, and the more it will cost you. If you have an highly emittive activity, it will cost you a lot. So we have various ways of explaining that to people. We can also, I will show you some graph. Which one? Just 2 minutes. This one, I like it. It's, you know, now you have like in the financial industry, people are working to align portfolio assets to climate scenario. And for example, we can show to C-levels that some of the business is not aligned to a 2-degree scenario, which means that tomorrow for sure, financial institution won't finance this kind of infrastructure or projects. So this is also a way to present it. So showing that companies are exposed to a growing price of carbon, which I'm sure will be part of the European Green New Deal scheme, showing that it will be harder to find money to finance projects. So this is also a way. Plus we have, at least in France, it's also an HR project, because young people don't want to work in a company where they do not address climate change. So many ways it depends on the company. If it's like it would be cool if it's like the HR department in many companies, but the F resource department. Merci Thomas. Do you also need initiative that invest in alternative for people who don't have a choice and need a car? Okay. I don't know in the US what are the top consultancies for decarbonization. I only know the French and a bit of the German field. Okay, if you have any other question, feel free.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, maybe as like a concluding thought, Thomas, if you have any advice for folks that wanna kind of participate in or do this type of work, either at their own companies or like forming consultancies or joining consultancies, yeah, what would you recommend for people looking
If
to
you
do
want
this?
to do it within your company, it's quite easy. You just need to have like this, I don't know, agreement for you from your managers to take like extra time to work on it. But it's not really difficult to do carbon assessment. Like the difficult part is to collect all the data. But then on internet, you have all the we call it factored emission. So you have all the key to translate this data into CO2 emissions, and most of data is available for free. So you can do quick estimates of your company's footprint, and that's already not sufficient, but a first step that will help you to show this report to people and to help people understand. So I would advise you to just try to do it by yourself. And within and if you want to work in like a consultancy, maybe, yes. I think now it's skills that you can develop yourself. So if you try to do it like, oh, I don't know, maybe you have a friend who has a restaurant and you can do its carbon assessment. And it's quite easy to get on board and to start doing it. So I will advise you just to try. Yeah, I don't know if it's a good advice, but sorry.
Yeah, that's
one last question, maybe.
Yeah, if anyone has one more question, go ahead. Or if something we didn't get to or answer fully, feel free to put that out there, and then we'll wrap things up and say a big thank you. It's been super informative. Well, yeah, well, maybe this is a good stopping point. Thank you for ending on that note of advice and, you know, the kind of just do it and get started mentality. I think that really resonates with kind of why a lot of people are here and what they hope to do after the Terra course. So really
that's what we did. Yeah, so sorry, Lenny, but that's what we did with Adrien. We didn't knew a lot about the issue, and we just started to do like carbon assessment for a company, for a few companies and for friends, and it started like that. So maybe you can like reproduce our approach.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, Thomas, and everyone who joined. Thank you for your questions.
Thanks.
It was really, really informative.